My name is Caleb Whitmore, I'm 27 now. And I used to think leaving your family was something only heartless people did. Turns out, sometimes it's the only way you survive them. 2 years ago, I walked out of my parents' house with a backpack, a dying phone, and exactly $43 in my bank account. No job lined up. No apartment. No real plan. And behind me, laughter. Not quiet disappointment. Not concern. Actual laughter. I still remember how my older sister, Brielle, leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, shaking her head like I was some kind of joke. "Caleb, be serious," she said, half smiling. "You can't even keep a part-time job. What exactly is your plan here?" I didn't answer, not because I didn't have one, but because I knew anything I said would just become another punchline. My dad didn't even look up from his chair. He just muttered, "He'll be back in a week." My mom tried to soften it, I think. She always did, but even she couldn't hide it this time. "Maybe just stay a little longer," she said quietly. "Figure things out first. Figure things out." I had been figuring things out in that house for years. Every idea I had was dismissed before it could breathe. Every small step forward was turned into a reminder of how far behind I supposedly was. So I grabbed my bag, opened the door, and left. No big speech. No dramatic moment. Just done. I don't know why, but the first thing I felt when I stepped outside wasn't fear. It was quiet. Not silence exactly, just the absence of their voices. No commentary. No judgment. No one watching me like I was about to fail. Looking back, that might have been the first moment I actually felt like my life belonged to me, even if I had no idea what I was doing with it. The first few weeks? Messy. That's the honest word. I slept on a friend's couch, Ethan. We weren't even that close, but he didn't ask too many questions. Just handed me a blanket and said, "Figure it out, man." I appreciated that more than he probably knew. During the day, I walked. A lot. Job applications. Coffee shops. Free Wi-Fi corners. I remember sitting in this tiny cafe one afternoon, staring at my laptop screen, trying to convince myself I wasn't making the biggest mistake of my life. Maybe they were right. Maybe I would be back in a week. I even hovered over my mom's contact once. Thumb just sitting there. I didn't call. Not because I was strong. Honestly, I think I was just too embarrassed to prove them right that quickly. The idea didn't come to me in some big, dramatic moment. Kind of crept in. I'd always been decent with design. Nothing formal. Just something I picked up over time, helping friends with logos, small social media posts, that kind of thing. Nothing serious. At least that's what I'd been told. But sitting there in that cafe, scrolling through freelance sites, I saw people charging for the exact kind of work I used to do for free. And something in me shifted a little. Not a big shift. Just enough to make me think, what if I actually tried? The first gig I got paid $15. 15. I stared at that notification like it was $1 million. It wasn't about the money. It was proof. Proof that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely useless like they made me feel. I didn't tell anyone. Not Ethan. Not my family. I just kept going. One gig turned into 3. 3 turned into 10. Some clients were great. Others, not so much. Late payments. Constant revisions. People who treated you like you were disposable. But I stuck with it. Because every time I thought about quitting, I heard Brielle's voice again. "You can't even keep a part-time job." And I don't know why, but that stuck with me more than anything else. Months passed. Slowly, things started to stabilize. I moved out of Ethan's place into a tiny studio apartment, if you could even call it that. The kitchen was basically part of the bed, but it was mine. No one commenting, no one watching, just me and the quiet again. I worked late most nights, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. That still feels strange to say. For the first time, effort actually felt like it was leading somewhere. Around month 8, something unexpected happened. A client I'd done a small project for referred me to someone bigger. Not huge, but bigger than anything I'd handled before. I almost said no. I remember sitting there, rereading the email, thinking this is where you mess it up, because that's what I'd been conditioned to expect. But then another thought crept in, or maybe this is where things change. I said yes. That project turned into something more consistent. Then more referrals. Then repeat clients. I stopped thinking in terms of surviving the month and started thinking about growth. Even now, that word feels weird. Growth. Like it belongs to someone else's story. And the whole time, I never went back home. Not for holidays. Not for birthdays. At first, it was out of stubbornness. Then it became something else. Distance. Not just physical, but emotional. I wasn't angry anymore. Not constantly, at least. Just detached. Like they were part of a life I used to have. About a year in, my mom tried calling again. I didn't pick up. I listened to the voicemail later. Caleb, just checking in. We haven't heard from you in a while. I hope you're okay. She paused there, like she didn't quite believe it. I miss you. I sat there for a long time after that. I almost called back. Almost. But something stopped me. Maybe I wasn't ready. Or maybe I didn't want to go back to being that version of myself. By year 2, things looked very different. Not perfect, but stable. And for me, that was everything. I had clients I trusted, work I was proud of, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. At least that's what I told myself. Then one evening, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I almost ignored it, but something about it felt off. I don't know how to explain it. Just one of those instincts you can't quite shake. So I got up, walked over and opened the door. And there they were. My dad, my mom, and Brielle, standing on my doorstep like they hadn't spent the last 2 years convinced I'd fail. For a second, none of us said anything. They just looked at me, really looked, like they were trying to match the person in front of them with the version they had in their heads. My dad cleared his throat first. We didn't know where else to go. That was the first thing he said. Not how are you? Not we're proud of you. Not even we were wrong. Just, we didn't know where else to go. And that's when I realized something had changed. Not just in my life, but in theirs. And whatever brought them here, it wasn't going to be simple. I didn't step aside right away. That probably sounds small, but it wasn't. 2 years ago, I would have moved instantly. Open door, step back, make space. That was my role in the family. Adjust, accommodate, don't make things uncomfortable. This time, I just stood there, one hand still on the door. Hi, my mom said softly. Her voice sounded thinner than I remembered. Or maybe I just wasn't used to hearing it without all the background noise of that house. Brielle gave me a quick once-over. Not in a warm way, more like she was trying to assess something. You look different, she said. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was a compliment, but because it wasn't. It was confusion. I am, I said. That seemed to land heavier than I expected. My dad shifted his weight. He looked tired. Not the usual kind of tired he used to carry after work. This was something else. Slower. Like something had been sitting on him for a while. Can we come in? He asked. And there it was. The moment I hadn't really prepared for. I wish I could say I handled it perfectly. That I paused, thought it through, set clear boundaries like some kind of self-help book version of myself. But the truth? I hesitated, then stepped aside. Yeah, come in. They walked in slowly, like they were entering someone else's life, which, I guess they were. My apartment wasn't big, but it was clean, organized. There were things on the walls now, design mock-ups, framed prints from projects I'd worked on. A desk setup that actually looked like it belonged to someone serious about what they did. Brielle noticed it first. This is yours? She asked. Yeah. She didn't say anything after that, but her expression shifted just slightly. Not admiration. Not yet. Just recalibration. My mom moved toward the small couch, running her hand along the fabric like she was grounding herself. It's nice, she said. Really nice. I nodded. Thanks. No one sat down. No one really knew how to start. So I did. What's going on? Straightforward. Maybe a little colder than I meant it to be. But I wasn't going to pretend this was a casual visit. My dad exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding something in the entire drive here. There have been some changes, he said. That word again. Changes. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Not defensive, just steady. What kind of changes? He glanced at my mom. She gave a small nod, like she was handing him the responsibility. The company downsized, he said. A few months ago. That caught me off guard. My dad had worked at the same place for over 20 years. It was one of the few things he was always sure about. They let you go? I asked. He nodded once. Thought I'd find something quick, he added. Didn't happen. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to react without it sounding wrong. Part of me felt bad. Another part, the quieter, less proud part, just thought, so things didn't go according to plan for you either. And the house? I asked. My mom looked down at her hands. We had to sell it, she said. That one hit differently. That house, for better or worse, it held everything. Every memory. Every argument. Every version of me they had ever known. Gone. When? I asked. A couple months ago. I did the math in my head. That meant they'd been dealing with this for a while. Without reaching out. Or maybe, without wanting to. Brielle finally spoke again. We've been staying with a friend, she said. But it's temporary. Her tone was tighter now. Less confident. And? I asked. She looked at me directly this time. And we need help. No sugar kuating. No soft lead-in. Just that. Silence settled in the room. Not awkward. Not heavy. Clear. Defined. I pushed myself off the wall and walked over to the small table near my desk. Picked up a glass. Filled it with water. Took a slow sip. Buying time, maybe. Or just grounding myself. Because this moment felt familiar in a strange way. Not the situation, but the dynamic. Them expecting something from me. Only this time, the roles were different. How did you find me? I asked, setting the glass down. My mom hesitated. We asked around. Your cousin mentioned you might still be in the city. Then, we saw your work online. That made me pause. My work? Brielle nodded. Yeah, she said. Your name's on it now. Took us a minute to realize it was actually you. There was something in her voice I couldn't quite place. Not mockery. Not quite respect either. Just surprise that hadn't fully settled yet. I let out a small breath. So, I said, you came here because what? You need a place to stay. My dad didn't answer immediately. We need time, he said eventually, to figure things out, get back on our feet. And you thought of me. It wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. You're doing well, he said. It's obvious. I almost laughed at that. Not out loud, but it sat right there in my chest. 2 years ago, I couldn't even convince them I had potential. Now suddenly, it was obvious. I'm working, I said carefully. I have commitments.
Client.
Deadlines. We're not asking you to stop your life, my mom said quickly. Just help us for a little while. A little while, I repeated. That phrase. I'd heard it before in different forms. Stay a little longer. Wait a little longer. Be patient. It never stayed little. Brielle stepped forward slightly. We're family, Caleb. There it was. The line that used to work every time. The one that used to shut down every argument, every hesitation I had. I looked at her. Really looked. Same posture. Same tone. But something about it didn't land the same way anymore. I know, I said, and I meant it. But knowing it didn't automatically mean agreeing. I walked over to the window, glanced outside. People moving, cars passing. Life continuing like this moment didn't matter at all. For a second, I thought about how different everything could have been. If I had come back after a week. If I had listened to them. If I had believed them. I probably wouldn't be standing here. Not like this. I need to think, I said finally. That surprised them. I could tell. Old me would have said yes immediately. Or at least tried to. Now, I needed space to decide. My dad nodded slowly. Of course. My mom looked like she wanted to say something else. But didn't. Brielle just watched me. Still trying to figure me out. They didn't leave right away. We sat for a bit. Small talk that didn't quite fit. Questions about work, about where I'd been. I answered. But not everything. Not yet. Because something told me this situation was bigger than just helping them out. There was history here. Patterns. And if I wasn't careful, I could end up right back where I started. That night, after they left, I sat alone in my apartment. Same space. Same quiet. But it felt different now. Heavier. I don't know how long I sat there thinking. Running through possibilities. Outcomes. What I owed them. What I owed myself. And somewhere in the middle of all that, a question kept coming back. Not loud. Just persistent. What happens if you let them back in? I didn't have an answer yet. But I knew one thing. This time, whatever decision I made, it wouldn't be out of guilt. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was stressed. Not exactly. It was more like my brain refused to settle on one version of the future. Every scenario played out differently. In one, I let them move in. Things start okay, then slowly, quietly, the old patterns creep back in. Comments. Expectations. That familiar feeling of shrinking without noticing. In another, I say no. Completely. shut the door. And yeah, that one looked cleaner, simpler, but it didn't feel right either. Because no matter how much distance I'd built, they were still my family. That doesn't disappear just because things got complicated. By morning, I wasn't looking for a perfect answer anymore. Just a clear one. I texted my mom first. Can you all come back today? We need to talk. She replied almost instantly. Of course. That alone told me how uncertain things were on their end. They showed up around noon. Same three faces. Same tension, but different energy. Less guarded. More hopeful. That made this harder than I expected. I didn't waste time with small talk. Before anything else, I said, standing near the kitchen counter, we need to be clear about something. They all nodded, almost in sync. I noticed that old habit, listening when things got serious. I'm not the same person who left that house, I said. No one interrupted. I'm willing to help, but not the way things used to be. My dad frowned slightly. What does that mean? It was a fair question. I took a breath. It means if you stay here, there are boundaries. That word landed differently than I expected. Brielle actually raised an eyebrow. Boundaries? She repeated. Not mocking, just unfamiliar. Yeah, I said. Real ones. I walked over to the table and pulled out a chair, sitting down slowly, not rushing it. This is my place, I continued. My work depends on this environment. So first, no interference with that. No comments about what I do, no questioning it, no treating it like it's temporary. Brielle shifted slightly, like she wanted to say something. She didn't. Second, I said, this isn't a permanent solution. We set a timeline. You use that time to figure out your next steps. My dad nodded once. That's fair. It surprised me how quickly he agreed. 2 years ago, he would have pushed back immediately. And third, I paused there. This one mattered more than the others. No guilt, I said. No, we're family, so you have to conversations. If something doesn't work, we talk about it directly. Silence. Not uncomfortable, just heavy. My mom looked at me like she was trying to understand how we got here. I never meant to make you feel like that, she said quietly. I know, I replied. And I did. But intention doesn't erase impact. Brielle crossed her arms. So basically, she said, we follow your rules in your house. There it was. That tone. Not aggressive, but edged. I met her gaze. Yeah, I said simply. No long explanation. No softening it. Just the truth. She held my stare for a second longer than necessary. Then looked away. That told me more than anything she could have said. My dad cleared his throat. We appreciate this, Caleb, he said. Really? And I believed him. At least in that moment. They moved in later that evening. It was strange, watching them settle into a space that used to represent my independence. Now it was shared again. Different, but shared. The first few days? Surprisingly calm. Too calm, maybe. Everyone was careful. Conversations were polite, measured. My mom helped with small things around the apartment, even though I told her she didn't have to. My dad spent most of his time on his laptop job searching. Brielle observed. That's the best way I can describe it. She didn't say much, just watched. Not in a judgmental way this time. More like she was trying to understand something that didn't fit her previous idea of me. One evening, I was working late at my desk when she finally spoke up. You're actually busy, she said from the couch.
I glanced over.
Yeah. She hesitated. I thought you were exaggerating before. I almost laughed. About working? About all of it. That hung in the air for a second. Then she added, quieter this time. I didn't think you could pull this off. There it was. Not an apology, but close enough to one that I didn't feel the need to push. Most people didn't, I said. She nodded slowly, like she was filing that away somewhere. Things continued like that for a while. Small conversations, subtle shifts, but underneath it, something was building. I could feel it, not in a dramatic way, just tension that hadn't fully surfaced yet. Came out a week later, not in a fight, not in raised voices, just a moment, the kind that sneaks up on you. I was on a call with a client, important one. New contract, long-term potential. Everything was going smoothly, until I heard voices in the background. My mom and dad, talking louder than usual. Not arguing, just not aware of how much it carried. I muted myself quickly. Hey, I said, stepping out of my workspace. Can you keep it down a bit? I'm on a call. My tone wasn't harsh, just direct. But the reaction, immediate. My dad stiffened. We're just talking, he said. I know, I replied, keeping my voice even. I just need it quieter right now. Brielle looked between us, sensing it too. That shift. The old dynamic trying to resurface. For a second, it felt like we were back in that house. Same positions. Same energy. Only this time, I didn't step back. My dad sighed, then nodded. All right. And just like that, it passed. But not completely, because something had been tested, and something had held. Later that night, I sat alone again, thinking, not about whether I made the right choice letting them stay, but about how fragile this balance was. One wrong step, and everything could slide back into what it used to be. And then another thought came in, quieter, more uncomfortable. What if helping them isn't the hard part? What if holding the line is? I didn't have an answer, but I had a feeling the real test hadn't even started yet. It didn't explode all at once. I think that's what made it harder to deal with. If there had been one big argument, one clear breaking point, it would have been easier to point at it and say, that's where things went wrong. But this, it was quieter, slower, little moments stacking on top of each other. It started with small comments. Nothing harsh, nothing obvious, just familiar. One afternoon, I was finishing up a design draft when my dad walked past my desk and glanced at the screen. How long does something like that take? He asked. A few hours, I said. He nodded, then added, doesn't seem that complicated. He didn't mean it the way it sounded. At least, I don't think he did. But it landed the same way it always used to. Like what I did didn't quite count. I didn't react right away. Just said, there's more to it than it looks. And went back to work. But something in my chest tightened. Not anger exactly. More like recognition. Then there was my mom. She meant well. She always did. But she started slipping back into old habits too. Checking in constantly. Did you eat? Are you working too much? You should take a break. Normal things. Caring things. But layered with something else. Something that felt like she still saw me as someone who couldn't manage his own life. And Brielle, she was the hardest to read. Sometimes she'd sit quietly, watching me work, like she was genuinely trying to understand. Other times, she'd drop comments that felt like echoes of the past. You got lucky with that client, she said once. I looked up. Maybe, I replied. Or maybe I worked for it. She didn't argue, just shrugged. But the point had already been made. None of it was enough to start a fight. Individually, each moment was small. But together, they built something. Pressure I could feel creeping back in. I caught myself one night adjusting the way I spoke on a client call, softening my tone, over-explaining, like I needed to justify my work. That's when it hit me. I'd done this before, for years, without realizing it, and I wasn't going back to that. The conversation happened the next evening. Not planned, not perfectly timed, just necessary. We were sitting around the small dining table. Takeout containers, half-finished conversations. Felt almost normal. That's what made it strange. Because underneath that surface, I could feel everything that hadn't been said. I need to say something, I said. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. I didn't leave just because I didn't have a plan, I continued. No one interrupted. I left because staying there made me feel like I couldn't become anything. The words came out slower than I expected. Not rehearsed, just honest. My mom frowned slightly. We never. I know, I said gently, cutting her off. You didn't say it directly. I looked at my dad. Not always, at least. He shifted in his seat. But it was there, I added. In the comments. The way things were dismissed. The way I was handled. That word sat heavy. Handled. Brielle leaned back slightly, arms crossed. What are you trying to say? She asked. Her tone wasn't aggressive, just guarded. I'm saying, I replied, that I spent a long time believing I wasn't capable of much. Silence. Not defensive this time, just still. And I don't think any of you meant for that to happen, I continued. But it did. My mom's eyes dropped to the table. My dad rubbed his hands together slowly. Brielle looked away. I had to leave to figure out who I was without all that, I said. That part felt important, because it wasn't just about them. It was about what I needed. For a moment no one spoke. Then my dad exhaled. We were trying to prepare you, he said, for reality. I nodded slowly. I get that. And I did. In his own way, he thought he was helping. But it didn't prepare me, I said. It made me hesitate, doubt myself before I even tried. That landed. I could see it. Not dramatically, just quietly. My mom finally looked up. Why didn't you tell us? She asked. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it felt like a question from a completely different timeline. I didn't think it would change anything, I said. And maybe that wasn't entirely fair, but it was how I felt back then. Brielle spoke next. You could have proven us wrong without leaving, she said. There it was. The logic that made sense on the surface. Maybe, I said. Then I shook my head slightly. No, I couldn't. She frowned. Because I was trying to prove you wrong on your terms, I explained. Not mine. That seemed to catch her off guard. I needed space, I added. Not just physically, mentally. The room went quiet again. But this time, it felt different. Less tense. More reflective. I'm not saying this to blame you, I said after a moment. I'm saying it because if we're going to make this work, we can't pretend that didn't happen. That was the real point. Not the past itself, but what we did with it. My dad nodded slowly. I didn't realize, he admitted. Simple. Not defensive. Just honest. My mom reached for my hand across the table, hesitated, then rested her fingers lightly on the surface instead. I'm sorry if we made you feel that way, she said. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Brielle didn't say anything right away. She just sat there, thinking. Then finally, I still think you could have handled it differently, she said. Of course she did. That was Brielle. But, she added quieter, I didn't know it hit you like that. That was as close as she was going to get. At least for now. And strangely, that was enough. That night felt like a shift. Not a dramatic one. No tears. No big emotional release. Just a line finally acknowledged. But here's the thing about truth. Once it's out there, you can't ignore it anymore. The next few days felt lighter. Conversations were more careful, but in a better way. More aware. More intentional. But at the same time, something else started to surface. Not from them. From me. A question I hadn't fully faced yet. Not about whether I could help them, but about how much I should. Because now that everything was out in the open, there were no excuses left. No misunderstandings to hide behind. Just choices. Clear ones. And I had a feeling the next decision I made was going to define everything that came after. For a little while after that conversation, things actually felt okay. Not perfect, but real. Like we'd finally stepped out of that invisible script we'd all been following for years. My dad stopped making those offhand comments about my work. If anything, he asked questions now. Carefully, like he didn't want to step on something again. My mom still checked in on me, but it felt lighter. Less like she was hovering, more like she was just there. And Brielle? She changed in smaller ways. Less commentary, more observation. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me while I worked. Not judging this time. Just thinking. It almost felt like we were rebuilding something. But here's the thing I didn't fully understand yet. Just because people try to change doesn't mean their instincts change at the same speed. And sometimes, those instincts show up when things get uncomfortable. About 3 weeks in, the pressure started again. Not obvious at first. Just practical concerns. Bills. Space. Time. Started with my dad. He'd been applying for jobs constantly, but nothing had come through yet. One evening, he sat down across from me. A little more tense than usual. I might need a bit more time, he said. I nodded. Okay. I meant it. That wasn't unreasonable. But then he added, until then, we should probably figure out how to manage expenses. There it was. Subtle. Logical. Expected. I've been covering everything so far, I said. Right? He replied. And we appreciate that. But it's not sustainable long-term. I leaned back slightly. What are you suggesting? He hesitated. Not long. Just enough to tell me he'd already thought it through. Maybe we combine things for now, he said. Treat it like a shared household. That didn't sound unreasonable either. On the surface. But something about it felt familiar. Too familiar. A shared household. I repeated. Yeah, he said. We all contribute however we can. I watched him for a second. Right now, I'm the only one contributing financially, I said. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. He nodded. Temporarily. That word again. I didn't answer immediately, because this wasn't just about money. It was about something deeper. Control. Ownership. The structure of the space I had built. Let me think about it, I said. Again. That phrase was becoming a pattern. Later that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. And then it happened. The moment that made everything clear. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was on another client call, same one from before, the long-term contract I'd been working to secure. This one mattered. A lot. Halfway through the call, I heard voices again. Louder this time. Not just conversation. Stress. I muted myself, stepped out quickly. What's going on? I asked. My mom looked flustered. My dad was pacing. Brielle stood near the window, arms crossed. We're just trying to figure something out, my dad said. I'm on a call, I replied. I need it quiet right now. My voice was still calm, but firmer. We can't pause everything every time you have a call, Brielle said. That stopped me. Not because of what she said, but how easily it came out, like it hadn't fully left her system. I'm not asking you to pause everything, I said. Just lower the volume for a bit. It's not always convenient, Caleb, she replied. There it was. Not loud, not aggressive, but clear. For a second, I felt it. That old pull. The instinct to back off. To adjust. To avoid tension. But then something else kicked in. Stronger. Steadier. This is my work, I said. Not raised. Not sharp. Just grounded. And it's what's keeping everything here running right now. Silence. Brielle held my gaze. Then looked away first. My dad exhaled. All right, let's keep it down. And just like that, it ended. Again. But this time it didn't feel resolved. Felt exposed. I went back to my call, finished it, closed my laptop, and sat there, staring at the screen long after it went dark. Because now I understood something I hadn't fully admitted to myself before. Helping them wasn't the problem. Living with them was. That evening I didn't wait. No slow build. No letting it sit. We need to talk, I said. Same words as before. Different weight. They gathered in the living area. I stayed standing this time. Didn't sit down. Didn't soften it. This isn't working the way it needs to, I said. My mom's expression dropped slightly. What do you mean? I mean the boundaries we talked about are starting to slip, I replied. That's not fair, Brielle said quickly. I looked at her. It is. No hesitation. This space, I continued, was built around my work, my routine, my structure. I gestured lightly around the apartment. And that's starting to change. We're trying, my dad said. I know, I replied, and I meant it. But trying doesn't always mean it's working. So what are you saying? Brielle asked. I took a breath, not to calm down, just to make sure I said it clearly. I'm saying we need to set an end date. That hit. Immediately, my mom blinked. An end date. Yes. How soon? My dad asked. 30 days, I said. No one spoke for a second. Then, that's not enough time, Brielle said. It's not meant to be comfortable, I replied. It's meant to be clear. Her expression tightened. This is your family, Caleb. I nodded slowly. I know. And then, after a brief pause, but this is my life. That was the line. The real one. My dad looked at me differently then. Not like before. Not like I was being unreasonable. More like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. We'll figure it out, he said quietly. My mom didn't argue. She just nodded. Even though I could see it hurt. Brielle? She didn't say anything. But the way she looked at me, it wasn't frustration anymore. It was something else. Something closer to respect. Even if she didn't want to admit it. That night, after everyone went to bed, I stood in the middle of my apartment. Same place I had stood the day they first showed up. But everything felt different now. Not because things were falling apart, but because, for the first time, I wasn't bending to keep them together. And strangely, that didn't feel wrong. Felt like the beginning of something, not an ending. The first week after I set the deadline felt tense. Not openly. No arguments. But there was this awareness in the air. My mom started packing small things earlier than necessary. Nothing obvious. Just organizing, folding, putting items back into bags like she didn't want to leave it all for the last minute. My dad doubled down on job applications. I'd hear him on calls sometimes, voice more formal than I'd ever heard it before. Controlled. Careful. Brielle? She got busier. Out more. Phone calls. Interviews, I think. She didn't share much, but I could tell she was trying. That mattered more than she probably realized. And me? I kept working. Same routine. Same focus. But there was something underneath it now. A kind of clarity. Not emotional distance exactly. More like I finally understood where I stood in all of this. And I wasn't moving from it. Around day 10, something shifted. Subtle. But real. I came out of my workspace one evening and found my dad sitting at the table. Not working. Just sitting there. Hands folded. Looking at nothing in particular. That wasn't like him lately. You okay? I asked. He looked up. Almost like I'd pulled him out of something. Yeah, he said. Then after a pause, just thinking. I nodded and started to move toward the kitchen. But he spoke again. You've built something here. I stopped. Turned back slightly. Yeah, I said. He looked around the apartment. Not critically. Not analytically. Just taking it in. I didn't see it before, he added. That landed. Not heavy. Not dramatic. Just honest. I didn't either, I replied. That surprised him. He gave a small, almost confused smile. I mean it, I said. I didn't know if it would work when I started. He leaned back slightly. But you kept going. Yeah. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable. Just real. I think I underestimated you, he said. That was it. No big apology. No long speech. Just that one sentence. And strangely, it was enough. Not to erase everything, but to shift something. Maybe, I said. Then added, a little more lightly, or maybe I just needed space to not feel underestimated all the time. He let out a quiet breath at that. Didn't argue. Fair, he said. That conversation stayed with me. Not because it fixed everything, but because it felt genuine. Like we weren't talking as parent and child for once. Just two people trying to understand what had happened between them. But the real moment? That came later, closer to the end. Day 27. I remember it clearly because I had just wrapped up a major project. The biggest one I'd landed so far. It went well. Better than expected. The kind of win that would have meant everything to me 2 years ago. I stepped out of my workspace, still holding on to that feeling, and found Brielle sitting on the couch. She looked up. You done? Yeah. She nodded. Then, after a second, can we talk? That caught me off guard. Brielle didn't usually ask. She stated, asserted, challenged. But this was different. Sure, I said. I sat across from her. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Just looked at her hands. Then back at me. I've been thinking about something, she said. Her voice was quieter than usual. Less certain. Okay, I replied. When you left, she continued, I thought you were being impulsive, irresponsible. I didn't interrupt. I thought you'd come back in a few days, maybe a week. She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. Honestly, I was waiting for it. I know, I said. She nodded slowly. But you didn't. No. Then she exhaled, like she was letting go of something she'd been holding on to for a while. I don't think I ever said this, she admitted. But I was wrong. That hit differently than anything else she could have said. Because Brielle didn't say that. Ever. I didn't think you had it in you, she added. No softening. No sugarcoating. Just direct. I leaned back slightly, taking that in. Most people didn't, I said again. She shook her head. No. I didn't want you to. That caught me. What do you mean? I asked. She hesitated, then said it anyway. Because if you did, it meant everything I believed about you was off. There it was. Not just doubt. Identity. Expectation. All of it tied together. And that's uncomfortable, she added. Yeah, I said quietly. It is. She looked at me for a second longer, then gave a small nod. But you did it anyway. Yeah. And now? She glanced around the apartment, then back at me. I'm trying to figure out what that means. I didn't answer right away, because I wasn't sure it needed an answer. Maybe it just means I needed to do things differently, I said eventually. She considered that, then nodded again. Yeah, she said. Maybe. That was the closest we'd ever been to understanding each other. Not perfectly, but enough. The last day came quietly. No countdown. No big moment. Just time. They packed up their things. Not rushed. Not slow. Just steady. My dad had lined up a short-term contract job in another city. Not ideal, but a start. My mom looked emotional but composed. She hugged me longer than usual. "Thank you," she said. Simple, but full. Brielle stood by the door for a second before leaving. Then she stepped forward. Gave me a quick hug. Unexpected. "I mean it," she said quietly. "You did good." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because coming from her, that meant more than she probably realized. "Thanks," I said. Then they left. And just like that, the apartment was mine again. Same walls, same desk, same quiet. But this time, it didn't feel like I had something to prove. Not to them, not to anyone. I walked back to my workspace, sat down, and opened my laptop. And for the first time in a long time, there was no weight attached to it. Just work. Just life. Just mine. The silence after they left felt different. Not empty. Not lonely. Just settled. I didn't rush to fill it. No music. No TV. I just stood there for a while, keys still in my hand, looking at the door like something might happen if I waited long enough. Nothing did. And that was the point. I went back to my desk, opened my laptop, stared at my inbox. There were emails waiting, deadlines, messages from clients. Life hadn't paused for any of this. And strangely, I liked that. The first few days were almost too normal. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. No interruptions. No background conversations. No shifting dynamics to manage. Just me and the routine I had built. But somewhere around the end of that first week, something unexpected hit me. Not regret. Not relief either. Just space. The kind you don't notice until it's there. I caught myself reaching for my phone a couple times. Not to call them. Just out of habit. Like part of me was still adjusting to the absence. And then one evening my mom called. I looked at the screen for a second longer than usual. Then I answered. "Hey," I said. "Hi," she replied. Her voice sounded steadier than the last time. That was a good sign. "How are you?" she asked. "Good," I said. "You? We're okay." There was a small pause. Then she added, "Your dad started the new job." "That's good," I said. And I meant it. "It's not permanent," she continued. "But it's something. Something is enough," I replied. She let out a quiet breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she added. I didn't ask which part. I had a feeling it was all of it. "I didn't realize how much pressure we were putting on you," she said. Her voice wasn't heavy with guilt, just reflective. "I didn't either," I admitted. And that was true. At least not at the time. "I'm glad you told us," she said. "Me too." We talked for a bit longer. Nothing intense. Just normal. Updates. Small things. And when the call ended, I sat there for a second, phone still in my hand. It didn't feel forced. It didn't feel distant either. Just balanced. That was new. A few days later, Brielle texted me. Not a long message. Just, "Got the job." I stared at it for a second. Then replied, "Nice. Knew you would." She didn't respond right away. But later that night, another message came through. "I've been thinking about what you said too." I waited. I think I've been measuring people the same way for a long time. That sounded like her. Not emotional. Not overly detailed. Just honest in her own way. I typed a response, erased it, typed again. Finally settled on, "It happens." She sent one more message after that. "Still weird seeing you like this." I smiled a little. "Same," I replied. And that was it. No big reconciliation. No dramatic closure. Just shifts. Small ones. Real ones. A month passed. Then another. Work kept growing. Not overnight. Not in some huge, flashy way. But steadily. Consistently. I picked up better clients. Longer contracts. Started turning down projects that didn't fit. That still felt strange. Saying no. Choosing. One afternoon I got an email that made me pause. A company I'd wanted to work with for a while had reached out. Not for a small project. For something bigger. Ongoing. I leaned back in my chair. Reread it a couple times. Then accepted. And as I sat there, processing it, I had this quiet realization. 2 years ago, I walked out of a house where people laughed at the idea of me figuring things out. Now, people were trusting me with their business. Their brand. their growth. No announcement. No moment where I turned to anyone and said, "See? I did it." Because I didn't need to anymore. That was the part one didn't expect. Not the success. Not the stability. The lack of needing validation. It didn't come all at once. Kind of faded. Quietly. And in its place, something better. Peace. A few weeks later I decided to visit them. Not out of obligation. Not because they asked. Just because I wanted to. They were in a smaller place now. Different city. Different setup. When I walked in, everything felt lighter. Less rigid. More open. My dad greeted me at the door. "Hey," he said. Simple. But there was something in his tone that hadn't been there before. My mom hugged me, same as always, but without that undercurrent of worry. Just warmth. Brielle nodded at me from the kitchen. "You made it," she said. "Yeah," I replied. We sat, talked, ate. Nothing dramatic. Just normal. But the difference was clear. No one questioned what I was doing. No one made comments about my choices. And I didn't feel like I needed to defend anything. At one point, my dad asked about a project I was working on. Not critically. Genuinely interested. I explained it. He listened. That was it. And somehow, that meant everything. When I left later that evening, I didn't feel that old weight. That pressure. That need to prove something before walking out the door. I just said goodbye. And meant it. On the drive back, I kept thinking about how things had changed. Not in some perfect, clean way. There were still gaps. Still things we'd probably never fully unpack. But it didn't feel unfinished. Felt resolved. Not because everything was fixed, but because everything was understood. And maybe that's enough. A few months passed after that visit. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden twist. No moment where everything changed overnight. Life just kept moving. And I think that's what made the difference. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting for something to happen. I wasn't bracing for a setback. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just living. Work grew in a way that felt steady instead of chaotic. I started being more selective with projects. Not out of ego, just clarity. Some clients weren't worth the time anymore. That still felt strange sometimes. Turning down work used to feel impossible. Now it felt necessary. I even started helping a couple of newer freelancers. Not formally. Just answering questions, giving feedback, pointing them in the right direction. I don't know why, but I saw a lot of my old self in them. That hesitation. That constant second-guessing. One of them, a guy named Marcus, sent me a message one night. "How did you get confident enough to charge what you do?" I stared at that for a while. Because the honest answer? I didn't wake up confident. I just got tired of undervaluing myself. So I told him that. You don't wait for confidence. You build it by not backing down every time doubt shows up. He replied almost instantly. That's actually helpful. I smiled a little at that. Because 2 years ago, I wouldn't have believed I'd be the one giving that kind of advice. And then something else started happening. People from my past began reaching out. Not a flood. Just occasional messages. Old classmates. Former coworkers. Some were curious. Some were genuinely supportive. A few felt like they were trying to reconnect now that things looked different. I didn't respond to all of them. Not out of resentment. Just discernment. That was another thing that had changed. I didn't feel the need to keep every door open anymore. But the most unexpected ripple? That came from Brielle. One evening, I got a call from her. Not a text. An actual call. "Hey," she said. Her voice sounded different. Less sharp. "Hey," I replied. "I've been thinking about something," she said. That was becoming a pattern with her. "Okay. I want to start something," she continued. "On my own." That caught my attention. "Like what?" "Not exactly sure yet," she admitted. "But something that's mine." I didn't say anything right away. Just listened. "I keep going back to what you said," she added. "About doing things on your own terms." That hit me in a way I didn't expect. "And?" I asked. "And I don't think I've ever done that," she said. There was no defensiveness in her voice. No edge. Just honesty. "I've always followed what made sense. What was expected," she continued. "But I don't actually know if that's what I want." I leaned back slightly. "Welcome to the confusing part," I said. She let out a small laugh. "Yeah. Figured." There was a pause. Then, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. How did you know it would work?" I smiled a little, because that question, it hadn't changed. I didn't, I said. Then why did you do it? I thought about that for a second. Really thought about it. Because staying felt worse than failing, I said. Silence on the other end. Not uncomfortable. Just processing. Yeah, she said quietly. That makes sense. We talked for a bit longer. Ideas. Possibilities. Nothing concrete. But something had shifted. She wasn't looking at me like I was the reckless one anymore. She was listening. After we hung up, I sat there for a while, thinking about how strange all of this was. 2 years ago, I was the one being questioned, doubted, dismissed. Now, I was the reference point. Not because I proved them wrong, but because I stayed consistent long enough for things to change. That's the part people don't really talk about. The time in between, the quiet work, the uncertainty. That's where everything actually happens. A few weeks later, my mom sent me a picture. Nothing fancy, just the three of them sitting at a small dining table, smiling. Dinner felt right today, she wrote. I looked at it for a while, not because it was perfect, but because it wasn't trying to be. It just was. And that's when it really hit me. This wasn't a story about leaving or proving anyone wrong. It was about building something for yourself and letting the rest catch up if it's willing to. Not everyone will, and that's okay. But some people, they do. In their own time, in their own way. And when they do, it doesn't feel like winning. Feels like peace. I don't know if everything between us will always stay like this. Life changes. People change. But I do know this. If I hadn't walked out that door 2 years ago, none of this would exist. Not the work. Not the stability. Not the version of me sitting here now. And definitely not this relationship. The one that finally feels real. So yeah, they laughed when I left with no plan. But they didn't laugh when they knocked on my door. And the best part? I didn't need them to.